What up, witches, and welcome to Witchin and Bitchin, a podcast. I'm your host, Darren.
And I'm Vicki. How are you all today? I hope you're doing really, really well. Sorry, I can't help it. It keeps going higher.
Soon you're going to go into that register where humans will no longer be able to hear you.
Just be dogs
and you're just going to have dogs barking in the distance that will be letting everyone know that you said something.
Yes, that will be it.
So we have another amazing guest for you all today. So Storm Faerywolf is a professional author, experienced teacher, visionary poet, and practicing warlock. He was trained and initiated into various streams of witchcraft, most notably the fairy tradition, where he holds the Black Wand of a Master. He is a co-founder of Black Rose, a school of modern folkloric witchcraft, and is a regular contributor to Modern Witch and columnist for the Wild Hunt. He is the author of several books, including The Stars Within the Earth, Betwixt Between, Forbidden Mysteries of Faery Witchcraft, and the forthcoming The Witch's Name. And he makes his home in San Francisco Bay Area and travels internationally teaching the magical arts. So for more information, you can head to faerywolf.com. But please welcome our amazing guest, Storm Faerywolf.
Yay!
Thank you so much for having me. It's exciting to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. It's so wonderful to get to talk to you. I've been looking forward to this for a while. So I wanted to start with a question that we often start. We start all of our interviews because it's kind of the reason we created the podcast. We want to kind of give a voice to everybody and make sure that there's not just one way to be a witch, I guess, is more sort of the thing. So with that in mind, what would be your definition of a modern day witch? And it's just your opinion. Doesn't need to be for everybody.
Well, I think that a witch is someone who obviously I would say works with magic. I'm going to give a hard boundary on that. You have to work with magic in order to be a witch. You're going to be casting spells at some point.
Yeah.
But also working with spirits. You know, to me, that is kind of the common denominator between all forms of witchcraft that I've encountered, is working with spirits in some form. And when I say spirits, of course, that's a pretty broad category. It could be like spirits of the dead. It could be deities, fae, the jinn, spirit of plants, spirit of stones, spirit of the land. So to me, that's really what a witch is. A modern witch would simply be somebody who does all that now. You know, somebody who maybe also doesn't shy away from, I don't know, the internet, social media, technology, and also sees that there is a spirit in that as well. So I don't know. I guess that would be my definition.
I guess off air before we started the interview, we got to experience your modern day witchcraft of talking to your house, and your house does things that you ask it to do.
See, that's it. Spirit of the house. There we go.
That's right. My Alexa and we have the wake word set to computer, and she's not listening now. I have her turned off so I wouldn't accidentally set her off. But that's just because I'm a big Star Trek nerd. And so I just wanted to feel like I was, at the helm of the Starship Enterprise. So living the dream. Exactly.
See, maybe that's why you should switch the wake word.
Do we need to start doing this now? Or is that the hand signal? Like,
oh yeah. Live long and
prosper. Oh, see, I can't get my little finger in there. And then also I guess off of the back of all of that as well, is there any particular, which I know that you do have a particular label as well, is there any particular sort of labels or ways that you identify?
Well, the big one that I, of course, use is Warlock.
Yeah.
And that really bothers a lot of people.
Yeah.
And,
I wondered if it did. I wondered if you you get a lot of discussion around that.
Yes. I get a lot of hate mail.
Really?
And it's crazy.
Really?
And
wow.
And it's I will say it's crazy, but it's also I don't know, a little bit delightful. I don't know exactly where in my astrological chart would justify that, but like when I get that kind of hate mail, I'm just like, oh, it's delicious to me, because I don't know, I'm a little judgmental about it, but I'm like, dude, it's an actual word. It's in the dictionary. It means a male witch. It does. You can argue with me that it's not what it means, but you'd be wrong, because that's what it means. You could look it up in any dictionary, and that's what it means. For 500 years, it has meant a male witch. And then people will say, well, it used to mean this. Well, lots of words used to mean something else. So it's true. The word warlock did used to mean oathbreaker, deceiver, liar, or a devil.
Yeah.
And it did have that connotation of magic. But it doesn't mean that now. It literally just means a male witch. But if you think about where the word warlock came from, it was definitely in the Christian era. And so if the word is talking about the betrayal of a covenant, whose covenant do you think it was talking about?
Yeah, that's right.
The next thing I will hear from pagans is that it said, oh, well, it's a warlock is someone who betrayed their coven. Well, you just made that up. And here's the thing, language is democratic. So it does change. It is about majority opinion. So it's possible that in the future, if enough people got together and decided that warlock really meant a witch who betrayed their coven, then it could turn into that later. But it's not there now. Pagans, we don't have enough numbers to make that happen. And so whatever. But I chose warlock. Well, I will say probably and this is not going to get me any fans, but the first influence I will say that led me to use warlock was when I was a little boy. I used to watch reruns of Bewitched, and of course, all the male witches were warlocks.
They were.
So that's what I learned. A male witch was a warlock. That was simply it, right? And thankfully, the dictionary's on my side. So that's good. Right. But so that was just in my brain, right? But then of course I read all the books and whatever, and warlock is an oathbreaker and it's an insult and blah blah blah. And I bought into it for a little while, and then I realized that I really needed, for my own life, being a gay man, I really had some issues with just masculinity, in a cultural sense. And I realized that if I had a term like warlock, that gave me a symbolic container, through which I could actually do some of that work. So for me, calling myself a warlock is, in one sense, about kind of meeting that those definitions of masculinity head on and trying to combat that toxic masculinity that really shows up. Because if you say, I don't know, I know the word witch is a gender neutral term, so that's I'm not debating that. But in the popular mindset, it is decidedly feminine. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that if men want to use that, even though they feel that maybe they even do feel that it's more feminine and they still want to use that, that's great. That's beautiful. That's just not where I'm at, because that's not my work. My work is to claim my masculinity, and then to also show the world that masculinity is a spectrum, and that there's a lot of different ways to be a man. And I was telling you before we started the show, I just turned 50 this year, and so growing up in the 70s and 80s, the whole paradigm was that gay men weren't real men. And so that was something that was real. And I mean, that still happens. Things are certainly better, now than they were than when I was a kid, but they're not great. And, but so for me to use warlock is a way to kind of combat that and say, no, I'm proud of being a man. I'm a cisgendered gay man, that's who I am. And I'm making a space for myself and for other men who want to claim that role. I'm certainly not saying that you have to do it. I'm not telling other people, I'm not going to call anybody else a warlock who doesn't want to be called a warlock. But I think everyone should be able to self-identify. But people get mad about it.
I didn't realize it would create that much, I guess, emotion or emotive.
I know. I'm like, why does it matter to you? Like, what? Call myself. But then, I do see some parallels with the struggles in the trans community. Where people want to call themselves what they feel that they are. And there's all these other people that are like, no, you're not that.
Like how
the
dare
J.K.
you
Rowlings of the world,
how dare you call yourself they and them, which is a collective pronoun, not a singular pronoun, and all of that. Like, you're preaching to the choir. But I was actually going to say, like, something just to touch on one of the things you said about Bewitched. It's interesting because even my own, I guess, resonance with the word warlock has changed over the years. It's one that I personally haven't used up until this point, but it's one that I think it's also because of the pop culture references. Like when I grew up in the 90s, like as I was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s. So for me, the word warlock, I mainly see it, and I'm actually now watching reruns of the original Charmed with the Halliwell sisters, and the warlocks were always depicted as being these really ugly, evil things. But then as you fast forward like 20 odd years, now in the era that we're in now, you've got things like shadow hunters, and a warlock is just the name they give to someone who uses magic. And like I don't know about y'all, but like I'm loving a little bit of Magnus and Alec bromance or romance on screen on I don't know if you watch Shadowhunters.
I've never seen it, but thank you for giving me a new show.
Oh yeah, Shadowhunters is amazing.
I'm
It's got the Nephilim, you got half angel, half humans mixed with some downworlders being like your werewolves and vampires, and then you got warlocks, which are your magical folk, and then you got the Sealies, so they're like they're almost like the Fae, well, their version of. But I love it because it's like, I mean, to be that all-ground powerful warlock, you know, that would be amazing. Like when you see Magnus, you'll understand. And there's just something like that's kind of sexy and hot and new about their definition of a warlock. It's nothing more than a magical being, like someone who uses magic. It's like they haven't made it any more complex than that. Whereas Charmed, like now watching it, I'm getting triggered. I'm like, why is it that an evil witch is a warlock, but a good witch is a witch? Like, so annoying. But anyway, I guess that at the time it was written, it made sense.
Yeah, well, it's, you know, they have to have their little tropes, you know. Kind of the thing that really bothered me was just like, oh, you can't use magic for personal gain. You know, I'm just like, screw that. That's exactly what I'm using magic for. Thank you very much. You know? I mean, sure, helping other people, that's awesome too. And I can think that's in our repertoire, you know, that we should be helping other people. But why shouldn't we be helping ourselves? You know, we absolutely should be helping ourselves. You know, so I don't know. Then I have to remind myself, you know, that's a TV show. It's not a documentary.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You gotta remember, this is just entertainment purposes. That's all it is. Going off of that as well, I'd love to know sort of how did you come to be, I guess, in this magical world? Like, was it something that's always sort of been a part of your life, or was it like a slow progression into it? How did you kind of, I guess, for want of a better word, your origin story?
Right. How did I become a supervillain?
Yeah. That's it.
I was always drawn to witchcraft, like inexplicably. And I mentioned before, I don't remember if it's before we started the show or not, but I mentioned Bewitched. And so I was young. I was probably like, 2 or 3 years old, you know, watching that show. And that was great. I loved Samantha Stevens and, you know, and I loved Endora and, you know, Uncle Arthur and all of that. And so, but then that kind of morphed, you know, I anything that was magical, I was just drawn to inexplicably. But then I would see other things like, oh, here's wizards and here's other types of magic. And it just didn't have the same connection for me. It didn't have that same romance. There was something about witchcraft, specifically witchcraft. And I don't know, I don't want to get into like, oh, it was in past lives or whatever. I don't know about that. You know, I mean, I do believe in some form of reincarnation. I feel like I have like snippets of memories that are probably past life stuff, but you know, mostly I'm focused on this life. That's all I could really do. I have enough on my plate. But I just really was always just drawn to witchcraft. If it had witch in it, I was there, you know? And so I love all those cheesy witch shows. I love all the witch shows, right? But so that was early. When I was like 2-3 years old, I remember I was very little and I told my mom, when I grow up, I'm going to be a witch. And,
wow, I love it.
You know, she's just like, oh yeah, he's watching too much Bewitched or, you know, whatever. And that's fine, you know, whatever. And here I am. I achieved my goal. But in terms of like formal witchcraft, I early teens, I guess, I started reading books. When I was 14, I wrote and performed my dedication to the craft, and I called on the goddess Diana. And it was actually pretty intense. And and so in fact, I won't talk about all the details of it, but part of the ritual was I took an apple and I cut it crossways to reveal the star, you know, inside with the apple core. And I buried half of it as an offering and I ate the other half. And I actually still have the core. I dried it and it's in a little deer. I should have found it before the interview, but
that's okay.
I know it's in a box somewhere, but I have it in a little deer hide pouch. And it's like the only thing I actually still have, from like my childhood, basically. Everything else is gone, but I have that apple core, and the rest, it just continued. I still, for a little bit, I had like a resurgence into Christianity when I was a freshman in high school, but I never gave up the craft. I actually never saw much of a conflict, between my version of Christianity and the craft. I certainly don't identify as Christian now, but I do see in Christianity the myth of Jesus as just another version, of the dying and resurrecting God. Wasn't he? I mean, let's not get down on Jesus because he was cool and everything, but he wasn't exactly unique. I mean, like hundreds, thousands of years before, it was that theme was already happening. And, I know people get really upset now, just like, they're the enemy and whatever. I'm like, well, no, Christianity as the umbrella term is not the enemy. Individual groups under that umbrella absolutely have been and are, but you can't, throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's actually a lot of good stuff in esoteric Christianity in the Bible. If you're an intelligent person and you sift through it and you take things as allegory and poetry, and there's a lot of power there. There's a lot of magic there, and I'm not really prepared to throw all that out. In fact, I had several years ago when we had the shop, I would do magical consultations for people. And I had a woman who came to see me, and she was having, some issues. She needed to be cleansed. There was some, dark stuff around her. And while I was in the session with her, I felt the presence of Jesus show up. Wow. Which was so weird for me because, again, I don't work with him, whatever. Yeah. And I had to stop and I had to tell her, I was just like, did you used to go to church, but now you don't? And she's like, yeah. And it was so weird. I got this sense that Jesus missed her.
Yeah.
And so I had to relay this message to her. But, and that's another thing, as a practicing warlock, as a professional warlock, if my goal is to spiritually help people, I have to meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
And it's not my place to force my spiritual worldview onto other people. So if somebody comes to me and they work in a Christian paradigm or in a Hindu paradigm or a Buddhist paradigm, my job is to make those translations and to try to help them connect, to what is actually going to speak to their soul. Witchcraft is certainly not for everybody.
That's right.
The work that I do being a public warlock, I'm not doing that to convert people to witchcraft. I'm doing it to help people who are already drawn to the craft, in order to get a better connection to their own higher self, to the spirits that they're working with, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my long-winded answer. I hope
No.
Question.
That was actually a really good answer. And that ties in so nicely because like, it's no secret. Like I myself have not completely walked away from my Christian upbringing because for me, I see that very much as my traditional roots. And like I can still appreciate, and I don't know if venerate is the right word, but the aspects of it that I do like, I still honor those. I just kind of, I have a different filter though when I look at it as a whole. Because like, I still do go to church, usually for Easter and Christmas as a traditional aspect of things, because like I had to deconstruct that and for a while because I was like, oh, Easter, Christmas, really? Is it? But then I eventually reconciled that because I now, like being an out and proud witch these days, especially with the podcast, like I separate Christmas from Yule and I separate Easter from Ostara. They're two different things to me. They're no longer one and the same like they used to be. Yeah. So, and I think this is a really important conversation to have because like you said, like I see it all the time on Facebook in all the witchcraft groups. As soon as you have someone who identifies as a Christian witch, it almost is a reverse witch hunt going on online. And it's so toxic. Like we're walking this spiritual path and like, then you have these people that are coming for someone because they're trying to force their view on something. Like, how can you hold on to something that, they used to do so many nasty things to our people. Now I'm like, yeah, but you can't now do the opposite back. Like that doesn't, two wrongs don't make it right. You know what I mean? So I think it's an important conversation to have, especially in this
the whole idea, I don't know. Well, it's kind of like the same phenomenon as the people who as children were bullied on the playground and then they turn around and they become the bullies.
Yeah.
And of course we see that a lot on social media.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bullies, cyber bully. Yeah. It's just crazy to me. And, I was bullied on the playground. But I feel anyway, I mean, and I will say that, you know, in my youth, I probably did, you know, kind of act out and bully people, you know, for a short time. But then I realized, you know, that this is not healthy. You know, this is not, I don't want to be that person. And I think at some point you have to take responsibility for your own healing.
Yeah.
And you have to, I don't know, I don't want to say rise above it. You have to integrate it. You have to transform it, you know, and move on and be a source of healing in the world. And so I'd like to think that because I know what it's like to be bullied and to be targeted, both as a child, but also as an adult, as a public warlock. I've been targeted, I've been cyberbullied, and, you know, the whole thing, and this has not been fun. But I like to think that it gives me a greater sense of compassion because I know how much that hurts. And I don't really want to inflict that on someone, even someone that might quote unquote deserve it, you know, because I've had people attack me, vicious attacks before. And my response is never to attack back. You know, I mean, I will reserve it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's always wrong to curse, you know, or throw a hex or whatever. I'm definitely a proponent of the idea of the righteous hex. But I also am not one of those people that's just going to do it all the time. I know witches and warlocks
drop of a hat
who just, all the time. And what are you doing? You're hexing yourself. You call that energy, that mindset through yourself. And that's a price that you pay. So there's always a price to pay, you know, for whatever magic you're doing. The price is that you become aligned to whatever energy you're wielding. Yeah. And if you're hexing people all the time, you are hexing yourself all the time. You become paranoid, weird health problems. You know, I've seen all those kind of things happen to people. So usually my response is like, no, my job is to elevate my spirit, you know, and I'm not a Pollyanna either. I'm not one of those white lighters that's like, oh, well, you know,
love and light, rainbows and kisses.
Yeah, exactly. Because I don't think that's real. I do think that if somebody is out there targeting people, you know, if they're dangerous, they need to be stopped. But you have to figure out what's your end goal. You know, is your end goal just to hurt this person to make you feel better? Well, that's just serving the ego. And that doesn't seem like that has any long-term, no long-term good effects.
No, because there's a very different thing if it's more of a self-defense kind of thing where there's that kind of harm aspect. But a lot of it, you've got to sit back and look, is it the ego that's actually coming in now that's really running the show to want to go that way?
I talk a little bit about that in my book, Forbidden Mysteries of Faery Witchcraft. I have a little section on cursing, and I don't actually tell you how to curse. I kind of do tell you how to curse, but I'm not telling you how to curse. It's like, if you're smart, you can figure it out.
You can work,
you know, whatever. But I'm not going to make it that easy for you because, you know, why? You know,
you've got to go find that out yourself.
Yeah, you'll figure it out on your own. And if you burn yourself doing it, well, then hopefully you'll learn.
Yeah, exactly. You'll learn from
how
it.
to do it right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it.
There are so many tangents I could take just from that little thing that you said right now. And now my brain's literally saying, which way do I want to go first? This is like a choose your own adventure book. So like, I guess on that last note, like one of the things that I think is really important as practitioners of our craft as well is what you just touched on then, that like it's important to know how to do all of these things like cursing and hexing and things like that, because it makes you a stronger medical practitioner. Not medical practitioner, makes you a stronger and better practitioner of your craft. But also I always say that the best offense is a good defense, but you need to understand how the offense is being done in order to be able to stop it from happening or undo it, you know, after it's happened. So like, I love the fact that you touch these, what I consider quote unquote taboo topics, because I think it's important. Like if you're constantly focusing on the love and light and all the peace and joy and like people can come for you. Like,
and that's also, I just feel that this is, I mean, and that's, as you know, that is so prevalent. It's not just in the quote unquote new age community, because I do see a lot of witches, you know, and pagans really like looking down their nose at new agers, right? Which I don't think is appropriate, because no one is exempt from that. But it is a form of spiritual bypassing. You know, this whole idea that like, oh, we're only going to focus on the positive, you know, whatever. Well, that's not the world. That's not real.
No.
It sounded like a dragon just went by. And those are my wards right there.
Yeah, that's it.
But the whole idea of spiritual bypassing, that just happens so often. People are like, oh no, I'm just going to focus on the positive. Well, then you're not really going to be that prepared to actually deal with what's happening in the world. The world is not all love and light. No. And we have to learn how to transform, these, quote unquote, darker energies or quote unquote negative energies. I'm putting those in quotes because those are really, I'm painting with a broad brush. Even like, oh, negative energy. It was like, well, negative energy isn't always bad. Sometimes you need negative energy. You used the word medical earlier, so I'll go on that tangent. If I'm doing like,
I don't know where that came from.
If I'm doing like healing work, and let's say somebody has like a cancerous tumor, you're not going to give that love and life force, right? You're not going to feed it.
Nope.
So you want negative energy for that.
You want to starve it. Yeah.
Exactly. So we really have to kind of look at how are we using these terms and and whatnot. But I do see a lot, and it is, I will say it is prevalent in the New Age community. Like I said, I owned a shop, for many years. One of the big sellers for us for a long time, I'm embarrassed to say, were the Oracle cards from Doreen Virtue. And I will go on record. I never could stand her. Yeah. I could never stand her. And I remember there was something she was talking about, like angels, and it was like the angel Uriel, and who's basically like the flame of God, right? And it's like they're an intense, and I mean, angels are really scary monsters when you get down to it. If you look at the old lore of angels, the first thing that they said to you is, do not be afraid. Why? Because you're shitting your pants, because they were horrible. It's like wheels of fire and 50 wings and 3 heads and whatever. And they're like, don't be afraid, I have a message for you. You're like, oh, I've gone mad. It's like some Lovecraftian beast like up in your but then to Doreen Virtue, it was like, oh, they're just like these beautiful invisible husbands that look like they should be on the cover of a romance novel. I'm like, okay, this is
they really
they're always listening to you and they love you. And my thing is like, what, angels don't give a flying F about you because they have bigger things to do. They're like these computer programs of the universe. They just do their job, right? And but I remember she did a tarot deck. And she redid like all of the negative cards. She made them all into positive.
Is this the one she did with Radley Valiente? Like they did as a co-release?
I know she did it with somebody. Yeah, she did it with somebody.
I think it was the one that was Doreen Virtue and Radley Valiente. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it was like the Angel Tarot or something.
Yeah, she actually did a couple. There was like, I think there was Angel Tarot. She did like Archangel. I mean, it was like there was her own cottage industry, right? I mean, that bought her compound in Hawaii. And but a lot of people really bought into it. And I also want to say, for a lot of people, it was actually what they needed at that moment, because they, maybe they were wounded and they couldn't deal with anything that was negative. And so I kind of saw it as a potential stepping stone. Okay, well, maybe this could be, these are the people who are wounded and they're not strong enough yet to do this other. I don't want to sound judgmental, and even though I know I am coming across as judgmental.
That's okay. Just blame your Gemini moon. It's fine. It's fine.
I often do. Gemini moon, Aries rising, you know what you're in for. So, but then it just never went anywhere. There was no stepping stone to anywhere. Yeah. And then of course she had her breakdown.
Yeah, that's right.
And then she renounced everything she did. She totally became a Jesus freak, and fairies are evil, and whatever. And I'm like, well, not all of us, but okay. No. Whatever, that's cool. But it really hurt a lot of people. There was a lot of people that really identified with, and they invested their own identities, in her worldview, and then for her to totally reject it. But I think the positive, because I'm always, again, I'm not a Pollyanna, but I'm looking for the positive in any situation. The silver lining to that is a lot of people were forced to do their own thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they had to claim their own spirituality outside of her definition, of that. And I see the same things happening in witchcraft. It just doesn't have to do with like, white light angels, it has to do with all sorts of different weird magical things. I always hear all these weird things about like, oh, you can't you can't blow out your candles. You're going to offend the fire elemental, and whatever. I'm like, I always blow out my candles. I used to
say that when I was like a witchling. I was like, oh, no, because my when I used to sit in psychic development class with my mediumship instructor, and she was very much the Doreen Virtue bandwagon. So that's what got me into the angelic realm through that way. But obviously now I've changed and evolved. But like every time at the end of circle, she would blow out a candle. I'm like, oh, you can't do that. You have to snuff them. So she'd intentionally go and blow them out like really abrasively, and I'm like, oh, stop it, and like, so I'm just laughing because I'm like, oh, you're reading me for filth right now.
I mean, there's all sorts of, I'm sure we've all done stuff like that, right? I'm in a good place because when I was younger and probably doing some of that stuff, the internet didn't exist, so there's no record. So I'm good, right? So but I feel a little bad for teenagers now, because it's like your entire life now is like, it's basically a digital museum. Yes. And everything you've ever said is now going to come back to haunt you. And, and
even before they can even speak, their parents are putting it out like online, and people can see like, oh, their first poop and their first walk and their first whatever.
God.
Like, like,
I know.
I'm like, why are you putting that out there? Anyway, tangent number one.
Totally though.
I would have just kind of circled back a little bit from what you were saying then as well with, quote unquote, like the more negative side or the darker energies and things like that. And then also your ability to be able to look for that positive, which is often like looking for that lesson and learning and integrating things.
Or as I would say, the tower moment.
The tower moment. Yeah. But because it's
another one of the cards that was missing from her deck.
Oh, yes. I was going to say that was probably one that wasn't there. That would not be there.
Triggered as well. That's my favorite card. Like, you can't get rid of it. It's like the best card in the deck. Like, I want to, this is like, pause for 1 second, but like, there's a deck that I've seen where they literally, it's an entire deck of towers.
Oh, wow.
Like, so someone's like drawn this themselves. So it's like the tower card being drawn like 72 times. But then whatever the, like, let's say it's the 4 of wands, you'll see like whatever the normal pictures are, like you'll see 4 wands and 2 people falling off the tower. Like, and so every card has been put with this filter. It's one of those ones through like Kickstarter or something. I'm so tempted to buy it, but I'm like,
because it's the tower.
Because it's the tower at every card. Because that's what life is like.
Cool.
Anyway, moving on. Right?
So I wanted to kind of come back to that with sort of shadow work and working with that sort of dark energies, because there is sometimes that thing that it's not a part of the craft. Like a lot of people, I know there's been quite a bit coming out at the moment that shadow work especially isn't actually a part of it, or when did it become a part of it? But which I know you have some opinions on that as well, but I would love for you to just sort of I guess unpack that a little bit, and in your practice and things like that, about shadow work and working with those energies, this balance between both sides.
Let me just grab my virtual popcorn and sit there reading the comments.
Yeah. I know.
It's so fun. That's such a timely question, because I was just seeing some of that kind of backlash against shadow work in the craft. I think just yesterday and today, I saw some of that, and I was like, what do you mean it's not part of the craft? It's like, that is the craft.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Shadow work is the craft, on a personal level, but also on a transpersonal level. The idea of witchcraft, even if I'm looking back to like, I don't ever want to say the burning times, because I just roll my eyes internally now when I hear that phrase. But
let me just
Inquisition, the witch trials, and
yeah,
right. But the idea that like, well, the witch trials were the manifestation of the Christian shadow.
Mm-hmm.
It was shadow work in real time on a transpersonal level. So for people to say, oh, it has no place in the craft, to me, that's just ignorant.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know our history, and you don't know your craft.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know that the term gets bandied about a lot, and that's not really what I'm talking about. Some people are talking about shadow work and they don't actually know what that means. It is a union term, and so it is about that which is not visible to the conscious mind, right?
Yep.
And so to me, the craft is about delving into the depths of your soul to see what lives there, right? And it kind of reminds me of that idea of the abyss, to look into the abyss looks into you, right? Well, that is where a witch finds their power. is from the abyss.
Yeah.
We have to confront our fear. And I will go further. We have to confront our shame. You know, all of us carry
the big one.
these things within us that a lot of times the ego, the conscious mind, doesn't want to look at because it doesn't feel good, right?
Yep.
Now, conversely, you can also have positive things in the shadow. You know, you could, some of your wounding can be not recognizing your own worth, right? And so you could have like these amazing talents, you could do these amazing things, and you still feel like, oh, you're nothing, you know, it's that whole imposter syndrome, you know, type thing. So the shadow isn't always what's negative. It's just usually, you know, what's negative. But ultimately it's about what you can't see. And I feel that that's kind of, I know this is kind of mixing everything up, but on an internal level, you know, it's not being able to see, you know, your internal blocks, you know, and your wounds that are kind of behind the scenes are actually steering you and steering your behavior. You know, on a transpersonal level, I kind of relate it to the scientific idea of dark matter. Because we know it's there, we know it's affecting things, but we can't see it. You know, and there's another thing in Anderson fairy tradition. We have a concept called the black heart of innocence, and this is a poetic metaphor, meaning kind of that on one level it's like the original state of the soul, but it's really about our sexual nature as well. But it's before we shame. Sexual shame was beaten into us, you know, either literally or just metaphorically through society. But it's black because it's dark. We don't see it, you know? And so in the same way that like a black hole, you can't see it directly, but we can infer its existence by what's going on around it. So same thing with the black heart of innocence. You can't see it directly. I can't know when I'm acting from my black heart of innocence. And I especially, like Vicki, I can't know if you would be acting from your black heart of innocence, but I can try to infer it from your behavior, but I can't see it directly. And so that's really, to me, that's the shadow. You can't really see it directly, but then we have a lot of magical and psychological techniques to help direct the light of our consciousness into that dark area so we can start to unpack what's there. So to me, that's a huge part, not just of witchcraft, but of any legitimate spiritual path, of any path, and beyond that, any path of psychological healing. And I know a lot of people get really upset about like, well, witchcraft isn't just self-help. And I'm like, well, okay, I think if you're taking that view that witchcraft is not self-help, then who the hell do you think you're helping? You know, you should start with yourself, right? Not in a miserly way, but it's kind of like when you're on your plane and those masks come down, right? And
you have to help yourself
on first. Then you're an annoying kid, you know, whatever. And then you can help them. But if you don't do that first, then you can make your choice after that. But once you've got your mask on, you know, then you're not going to die, and you can then be useful, you know, to help others. And that's how I see my path in the craft. You know, I am going to do I am going to do self-help work. I am trying to be better. If I'm not actively trying to better myself, then what's the point of any of it? I honestly don't get it. I don't get it. And that really is about having compassion for ourselves first.
You know, and that's really the essence of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel, and that's another thing I think that it starts to piss off witches, like compassion. There was somebody in my tradition, not Blue Rose, but in the larger Anderson fairy tradition years ago, somebody told me that compassion had no place in fairy. And I was like, I don't know what you're doing then. I mean, I got it that they believed that because I thought they were a horrible, horrible person. So I was like, okay, I can understand that you would think so. But really, if you don't think that compassion has a place in your spiritual and magical practice, I don't want to know you. You know, I mean, you might as well be Donald Trump at that point. I have no interest, you know, and it's just ignorant. You know, it's this idea that compassion is just, again, using that term Pollyanna, just like, it's like, oh, I'm just going to hold your hand and there, dear. It's all going to be okay. And here's a stuffed animal and some cotton candy. And it's all going to be fine. And we're going to take the tower card out of the deck. And it's all going to be romance angels from here on out. But real compassion is fierce.
Yeah.
That's right.
It has passion in the word.
Yeah.
And it can be sharp. A slap across the face can potentially be the most compassionate thing somebody could do for you. If your head is so far up your own butt, that you're not able to see the light of day. I want someone to shake me.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Sometimes you need those,
hey,
like,
what the hell are you going on?
That like tough love kind of approach. Like, I mean,
yeah.
To use a pop culture reference, like, when I used to watch The Biggest Loser, and like we had Jillian Michaels, like, and I literally, when I used to get a personal trainer, I would look for that person that would treat me like shit. Because if you want me to do those things and do another 10 more and then another 10 more, and you don't want me to punch you in the face, you need to treat me like shit to get that part of me to push myself to do another 50 burpees or whatever it is. But like, that's a random tangent. No, but like, sometimes you need that proverbial slap in the face to wake the fuck up and realize, like, you're not all that. But I was going to say with compassion as well, like one of my patron deities is actually Kuan Yin, the goddess of compassion and mercy. And people are like, oh, she's so like, la da da. I'm like, she's actually not. Like, the things that I've learned from Kuan Yin is like, it's a motto that I've adopted, which is, because I read a lot. So I always say that education leads to understanding, understanding leads to tolerance, tolerance leads to acceptance, and acceptance leads to unconditional love and compassion. So like for me, the easiest, well, not easiest, sometimes it's hard. So the journey always starts with education. So that's why I always try to educate myself about someone. Like if someone's being a douchebag or being really forthcoming with their view and saying, you're wrong, I'm right, da 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 da, the first thing I do is I try to educate myself on their stance. And then through that, get towards understanding and then showing compassion towards them. Whereas these days, you see on the internet, people are so quick to just fly off with their, clap back or, and all that kind of stuff. It's like, really, just pause for a second and ask them questions. Ask where they're coming from. Understand where they're coming from before you just clap back, rather than just being an absolute ass back to them.
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I and that's something I will admit that's something I had to really teach myself and try to learn over the years, because I was always so quick to like respond to everything. And then at some point it hit me. It was just like, well, this is just me feeding my own ego. It's not like the world needs to hear what Storm Faerywolf has to say about every subject.
Yes, they do.
I mean, I am opinionated. Like I like to say, I am an expert.
No, really?
So, but I used to respond to everything, and I thought I have to have a stance on this, and blah, blah, blah. And sometimes I still do. Especially in 2016 when we were having our election here in the United States, and I was very worried, and obviously rightly so, the way that things were going to go, and I was really trying to get people to vote, and I remember there was somebody, I'm not going to name names, but there was somebody in the pagan community who really was mad at me because they said that I was shaming people into voting. I was basically shaming people into voting for Hillary, right? And I won't even say that they're necessarily wrong. What I will say that I did wrong probably in that instance is I didn't shame people enough, so, but because obviously it didn't go the way it was supposed to go.
Right. No.
But I don't know. I think it's a fine line. I have to just, you have to choose your battles, and so I'm more likely now to like start typing a response and then I'll just delete it.
Yeah.
And then for me, it's like, okay, I got to work that out. Because again, as the Gemini moon, I have to express it somehow in order to kind of organize my own thoughts. And so, but then I realized, well, that's just for me. I don't actually need to put that out there all the time. And so 9 times out of 10 now, I will just delete the I don't even.
You've got control. I'm a Libra moon with Cap rising. So I'll draft it up. I'll save the draft, sleep on it for 24 hours. And if I'm still like fucked off, then I'll push send.
That's good too. And I've certainly done that. There's some things that I'm like, I feel like I should wade in to this, but I've also there's been certain things that I've just been shocked that people will take the stances that they will, and whatever. And I'm like, really, is that the hill you want to die on? It's crazy. Like people were so mad. And I don't know about anything recently, but they were so mad at Ellen DeGeneres. Because her and Portia de Rossi were sitting next to George W. Bush, like watching a ball game or something. And they were like, oh, he's a war criminal and blah, 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 blah. And but technically all US presidents are war criminals, Let's just be honest about that. Some are worse than others, obviously. And I had no love for George W. Bush, but I wasn't going to jump on this bandwagon and just destroy Ellen DeGeneres. And I literally said, is it, really, is this, can't we just be kind just for a little while? Is this a hill you want to die on? And people were like, absolutely, yes, that is the hill we want to die on. And screw you for not hating her too. And, you're just nothing, you're a piece of shit. And I'm like, wow, this is not how I thought it was going to go.
Yeah.
But so I don't know, I have some issues with even my own folk. I consider myself a leftist, I consider myself a liberal. But it's mostly the people on the left that I have problems with now, because there's this whole weird purity test, about like, oh, well, you said something wrong once and therefore you're canceled forever. And I feel like there can be no space for nuance, and there can be no space for people learning and growing and getting better.
Yeah.
And I've certainly said things in my youth that I'm embarrassed that I said, words that were commonly used, not that I'm going to repeat them now because I don't want to get canceled now.
No.
But things that were just, you wouldn't even think of, but now it's like, oh yeah, that's really messed up. We shouldn't be saying those words, and whatever. But now you could pull up a post from, like several years ago. Oh, they once said this word and now they're canceled. And it's just as bad as the extreme right. And so what does that tell us? Extremism is bad.
Yeah.
See, standards are good, but extremism is bad.
I've now, every time Facebook comes up with memories, I always go through them, but it's now I go through them from a lens of seeing, oh, what were the dumb shit that I used to say? But then every once in a while I'll come across, I'm like, oh, yeah, delete. That's gotta go. Because obviously, like the more public you become and all that kind of stuff, and it's in anything. Like, these days people could do a quick Google search and find anything about you. So like I'm now actively going through, but I'll go through waves. There'll be like a few days where I literally will do it every day, and then I'll forget for a few weeks. I'm like, oh, damn it. Now I have to wait till next year before I can go back and clear those ones. But I think it's really important because I also treat that as a modern day form of shadow work. Because obviously I said what I said at the time that I said it, because I was clearly going through something. Yeah. And so now I've got time to reconcile it and go, ooh, do I still feel this way? Or did that need to be said? And I kind of like, even just the pure act of reading my post and then the comments, oh, that's nasty. Delete. Like for me, that's a way of purging some of those aspects of self that, were expressed back then. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, we have the advantage of hindsight giving us a deeper perspective. And it doesn't mean necessarily that it was wrong, even depending on what it was, it might not have been wrong to say that at the time, but now the culture shifted. We have a different awareness. And I like to come back to that phrase, when you know better, you'll do better.
Yeah.
And I think that we should all give each other the space to learn how to know and do better. And it's one thing if you just won't, learn how to do better. That's a different thing. But we're human, and not anyone is perfect. And
what?
And
I'm living a life.
That's just one of the things that kind of I don't know. I'll say it kind of scares me a little bit about the internet. That it's like a time bomb. And you don't know what you may have said. Maybe you said something in private, to friends, and everybody knows you're joking. But now you've had a falling out with one of those people, and they've screen capped that from 5 years ago, and now they're putting it out there and whatever, and it's causing all this drama and whatever. And I'm seeing some of that happen, on social media now, and my heart goes out because I know what it's like to be targeted, and to take things out of context.
Oh yeah,
that's a big thing.
I was accused of doxing somebody once. It didn't actually happen, but again, it was stuff that was taken out of context. This is from years and years ago, and people still believe it. Just a couple of years ago, somebody said, "Oh, I saw you doxed this person." Blah. No, that actually never happened. Whatever. But yeah, I don't know. So I think culturally we're still trying to figure it out because the internet's relatively new.
Yeah.
And we still don't know exactly how to deal with it. And for a while I wondered, I'm like, are we built to withstand this stress, because back in like 2003, 2004, I was cyberbullied by members of my own tradition. And it was all weird, culty political stuff, like I have a different opinion than some others do. And, from my perspective, they're fundamentalists, and I'm public and they don't like that, right? Because they're very secretive and everything should be secret. And I wasn't trained that way. To me, I've not revealed anything that I vowed to keep secret. And so, but our line was different. We're more open. And so I was targeted. And at the time, it was the most difficult thing emotionally I'd ever gone through. I mean, I literally cried myself to sleep on more than one night. And I thought I was going crazy, and there was this person who kept making all these accusations, against me and, and all that. And I would and then with the doxing thing, they were accusing me like under other screen names, like these multiple screen names. And I was like, well, actually all these screen names are this person. And because I said, oh, it's this person, people said, oh, you've outed them. You've outed them as a witch. Well, no, they had used their legal name in connection with their witchcraft, with their sexuality, with their place of employment, like all these things. It was all public knowledge, but people were using this weird, obscure thing in the craft, like, oh, you can't, reveal who's in your craft or whatever. I'm like, they're literally accusing me of crimes. And I know that they know that they're wrong, that they're making this stuff up, because none of it happened, and suddenly I'm not allowed to defend myself. And I thought and then I would show like screenshots, I actually links, I would send links to people. They're like, oh, you're attacking this person and you've doxed them. I'm like, no, here's where they said it. And that person would get the stuff taken down, like from the internet. And I literally thought I was going crazy for a little while. And I was like, oh my God, it's all good. So then I realized, oh, I can screen cap things, and so I got screen cap. So now I'm one of those people that has files on people. And I'm not, that sounds totally crazy, right? But
Vicki, watch what we say.
Right? Totally, because it was just to keep my own sanity. I was like, no, I have to, if this ever comes up, if I ever have to go to court, I'm going to have the receipts, whatever. And again, in another way, it happened, I would say 3 years ago. I was actually accused of sexually abusing a student, and it wasn't even a person I'd ever met, and I had never had any interaction with this person. But they had gotten like in a group of these fundamental people from my tradition, and they hated me. And once this person heard, oh, they hate Storm. Oh, well, I hate Storm too. And here's what he did, and blah, blah, blah. Now, luckily, this person publicly recanted, and the Wild Hunt actually did a little story, on it and whatever. Yeah. So I was exonerated. But for 5 days, it was very stressful. And it was it was a weird, like meth-induced fantasy from this person. And it was like, they literally said that my supporters broke into their house and stole their laptop. So they no longer had any evidence that we had ever like hung out, and all the pictures were gone. I'd never met this person. This person has since like messaged me several times over the years and continued to apologize, because it was really painful. But I thought for a while, I was like, how can people deal with this? And also it made me sad, because I'm like, but there are people that really are being sexually abused, and we want people to believe victims. And yet when this sort of stuff happens, it makes it really difficult to believe victims. And so I'm in this place where I'm like, yeah, we want to believe victims, but we also have to give for that space of evidence. We have to hear the whole story. We can't just assume that everybody there are people that will wrongfully accuse you. And I was pretty naive, up until all this. I never had any enemies in my life, until all this stuff happened. And so that was a pretty big eye opener for me. But now that stuff's over, I'm actually glad that it all happened, because I feel like it did help me to become a better person, because my response wasn't to attack these people. My response was just to try to get to the truth and just speak my truth. And I was angry, and rightly so, but I didn't need to attack anybody, because I knew I was in the right, know? And, but that's so terrible. I mean, like I'm old enough to handle myself. can you imagine if you're a teenager and dealing with this and you don't have the tools to deal with this? It's criminal, really.
Well, this is the thing, like,
Vicky, that's the shadow, I would say, of our internet
exactly
culture, you know.
Exactly. And actually, Vicky and I spoke about this recently because we have had someone come for us even. And it was like really one of those things where, like, literally this person just sent us a random email about a comment that I'd said on air, which was basically going back to something we said earlier about self-labeling. So I labeled myself in a particular manner, which upset someone else because, like, let's just call it what it is. I called myself a wog. Now, to Americans, wog means nothing. And I was talking about my wog mum because that's what I call it. It's a term of endearment. Now, wog was actually a word that was used in the 70s against European migrants as a derogatory slur. And so, but we reclaimed that word. So I use it as a term of pride. But then this person came for me because they were originally from England. And in England, wog is short for gollywog, which is basically the equivalent of the American N-word.
Oh.
So because I had self-identified using the word wog, it really triggered them and they came for me. And then I responded politely, explaining my stance, explaining my worldview and why I use that word. And then they came for me again. And then I defended myself one more time. Then they came for me again. I said, look, I'm blocking you. You can no longer contact me. They went so far as this was like about 48 hours of hell. Vicky was like constantly calling me, are you okay? Because she would see the emails coming through and she's like, stop responding. I'm going to respond to this one. And she tried to jump in. This person went so far as to, they created 4 different email addresses that we had to block. They also created 4 different handles on YouTube that they were coming for us there, like just commenting wherever they could. So then it basically made a shit show for us to have to then go and delete all these comments because they were calling me a racist and they were saying that I was, I don't even remember all the other like accusations against me. I'm like, I don't need this kind of shit out there. Like, do you not realize you're like fucking with someone's entire life and everything they stand for by making these like accusations and like saying this? Because I'm not a racist in the slightest. But then just to have that on the internet saying, Darren is a racist. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, because anyone could screen grab that and then, you know, use that against me. So I'm like, fucking like damage control. And so I will be honest, I was this close to doing the world's biggest hex or curse on this person. You can ask Vicky, she had to talk me off a ledge. I was like fighting with all of the fibers in my body to not go there. Because like, I've got all the books, I've got all the tools. Like, you want to fucking come for me? I'll fucking come back. Like, you know what I mean? But I restrained.
Yeah, because you're going to restrained. Where that comes from. Because in the end, they're just looking for more attention and more.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then you're just giving that to them.
Yeah,
you're just giving them that life force, that attention. There's what I've noticed is that just blocking and muting and ignoring. Just drives those people insane. And so even from the petty ego level, because girl, I can totally be petty too, like on the inside, right? And so there's some people that I just block. I won't engage, and it gives me a little happy inside because they will spin out of control.
Because they won't know if they can't find you, but then then this could happen. They could set up multiple accounts and just keep coming for you.
It's funny to me because, and then sometimes people will send me like screenshots or, you know, somebody said this about you on a podcast or, you know, whatever. And I don't need to know, you know, I don't need to know somebody else's opinion of me, especially somebody that I don't like, you know, it doesn't even matter, you know, whatever. But I will say it did give me a little happy because I'm like, I'm not talking about them, but they're talking about me.
Yeah, that's right.
So and any publicity is good publicity.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's true. Actually, every time that I've been accused of something and the little controversy, whatever, I get more students, you know, I get like more follows and likes and whatever. And so my little joke has been like, these are actually now hopefully sell more books. Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah. That's it.
So now my little joke has been like, oh, they're my biggest fans. They just don't know it. You know, I should probably send them like a gift basket or something. But you know, also I don't want to incur those connections. No, you know, once you do a cut and clear, right? You cut the cord, you gotta leave it cut. You know, don't go back.
In the words of my husband, why are you so obsessed with me? Like, and he always says that. Valley of Us. Why are you so obsessed with me? Like, anyways, I do want to circle back though, because there is a reason we brought you on this podcast. And by the way, all of this conversation is like completely so relevant and needed right now. So I'm not editing any of this out, by the way. This is just going to be an ended cut, and I don't care, because I think it's really important to have these conversations and to normalize it and realize, like, I mean, we're in our 30s, you've just turned 50, like, and people are coming for us. Like, we have to think what this is doing to younger generations that are reading this kind of shit and seeing this kind of interaction between adults online, because they're also
in
reading
air quotes.
seeing it.
Yeah.
Adults. Like, because, like, you know, so it's like we have to lead by example, because we're the generation that had the internet come in to play. We need to be the ones that need to think, pause for a second, does that need to be posted anywhere? Anyway, I'm going to put that to bed. So there was no clean segue for this, but
no. That's all right.
I just thought, let's just go there. But there was one thing that I wanted to segue a little while back, because you were saying about talking about the things that shouldn't be talked about and whatnot, like revealing mysteries. There is a particular book that you have written, which is called The Forbidden Mysteries of Faery Witchcraft. Now, I could easily sit here and talk up both these books and like just plug the shit out of them, because I was actually doing this to Vicki last night. She's like, oh, now I want them. Because I was sitting saying, and it has this, and it has all these exercises, and it's journaling prompts, and then it has all this stuff, and because I was telling her about it because I own them and she doesn't. But I would rather hear it from you. Like, it doesn't have to be an elevator pitch, but what would you say to someone who's interested in your books? Like, what are they going to get from one to the other? I say buy both, but yeah, up to them. But what are they going to get from these particular books that you've written?
Well, I'm gonna also agree with you, and you should buy both.
Yes, you should.
The first one, Betwixt and Between, Exploring the Fairy Tradition of Witchcraft, that's the foundation of the Anderson fairy tradition. Yeah. And I'll pause and let you. Oh, you're holding the book up.
I was holding the book up. Yeah.
Ooh, I love that cover. They did such a good job.
I was going to say, it's a beautiful cover.
I have to be honest. This was the cover that attracted me initially, because this is the first of your books that I bought. And when I saw the cover, I was like, wow. I was like totally digging the whole peacock vibe at the time. And then when I flipped it over onto the back, because I'm someone who always reads the back of a book first. And I'm like, oh, this is like, it just hooked me right in. And then I'm like, and then I do the flick through, and I'm like, just kind of seeing what kind of content is in there. And as a life coach, like when I see someone that will literally break it down from, here's some content, so it appeals to my nerd brain, that here's the like, you know, theory behind it. Then here's a journal prompt, so that appeals to my Cancer sun that just wants to journal about everything and my feelings and blah, 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 blah. And then you give them like a little, either a recipe or a spell, or just something that it can physically do, so that appeals to my Cap rising that needs to do the things. Like, it literally ticks all the boxes for me. And I know that,
thank you.
Like, I'm just like, I don't mean to become a salesperson for you, but like, in all honesty, I just love that about your book, because it's interactive. It's not just like, here's a whole heap of dry theory. Like, you've actually given the steps to do the work, because in the end of the day, that's what witches are. We do the work. We don't just read a whole heap of books. Yeah. Anyway.
Thank you. Yeah.
So
I might, you're doing a great job. I really appreciate it. Thank you. That's just, you know, that's pretty much, that's how I embody the craft. It's through the doing, you know. I mean, witchcraft has craft right there, you know, so it kind of implies doing something, making something, but also, I'll just say the fairy tradition, and it should be understood that that's shorthand for the Anderson fairy tradition, or the American fairy, whatever you want to call it. It's a branding nightmare, terrible. But it is so hands-on. You know, it's not for armchair witches. You know, it is. Yeah. I mean, you could be an armchair a little bit, right? We all got to rest, but then you got to get up off your butt and you got to do something, right? And so, both of those books they're basically, I wrote them to be basically textbooks for how I train in Blue Rose. And Blue Rose, of course, is the lineage of the Anderson fairy tradition that I founded. And so Betwixt and Between is the beginning of that journey. And so it is the history of our tradition, also like the poetic history. I talk about the difference between like a poetic truth and a literal truth, and how both of those are true, but they just are approaching it in a different way. Both are necessary. I talk about the different spirits and deities that are often worked with in fairy tradition. I can't really say the deities that are worked with in fairy tradition, because a fairy practitioner can work with any and all deities. The late founder of our tradition, Victor Anderson, said that we don't have our own pantheon. You know, that a fairy practitioner works with all the gods. It's whoever shows up for you.
Yeah.
But there's some deities that are more common in our tradition, and so I've stuck with those. They're almost like a teaching pantheon, you know, to some degree. And so that was a labor of love, you know, putting together Betwixt and Between. But I will say, a lot of people will see it. They're like, oh, fairy tradition. Oh, it's all about the fairies. I want to make offerings to the fairies. And there's very precious little of that in that book, because it's so much bigger than that. You know, when I'm talking about the term fairy, it's not just fairies as you might think of as, like, you know, from Ireland or the British Isles. It's a small part of what it is. But the word fairy really originally meant things of magic and enchantment. And so it was all things magic and enchantment. And there's also kind of a feeling there too, you know, in fairy or fairy, it's also incorporates that sense of eeriness, you know, that otherworldly eeriness. And so that's really something too that I think is important about our tradition. But it is a particular tradition of witchcraft, and it is uniquely American. Victor claimed that it actually came from Africa. I take that with some grain of salt. I think that that's a poetic truth. I don't think that it literally lineagely came down. I just made up a word. That it came down, you know, from you know, Africa. But Victor claimed that he was first initiated when he was 9 years old, in a very kind of creepy way, because it was supposedly a sexual initiation. I would say, and I do address this, I'm like, this is kind of creepy and this should not be a role model thing. No one should be doing this, you know? But I also don't think it physically happened. And that puts me at odds with what Victor said up until his death. You know, he said it actually happened. But in some of his earlier accounts, he said that, like, the next day when he woke up, it all seemed like it had been a dream. And so I do think that it happened. If he wasn't just a liar, and I have to accept that he could have been a liar, that it probably was a trance experience or an astral, you know, experience, because he was almost totally blind, you know, since he was 2 years old. And this story is that he's heard the sound of drumming coming from the woods near his home. He lived in New Mexico, and he wandered out into the woods, and he found a small dark woman sitting in a circle surrounded by all these brass bowls filled with different herbs. And he instinctively knew to take off his clothes, and he entered the circle, and she sexually initiated him, blah, 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 blah. Well, later, this is actually after I wrote Betwixt and Between. Actually, it was right before it came out, but we'd already done.
It's already done.
It's already done. We found that Victor, after he died, he had a book, like, in a lockbox. And this book was a cheesy pulp fiction novel called Confessions of a Warlock. And the author, it was a pseudonym, but it was Curtis Lavender. And I have the book. I haven't read it. I've skimmed through it. It's terrible. But it came out, I want to say 9 years before the first written account of Victor's initiation. And it's identical. It's almost identical. So it kind of tells me that, like, Victor, even if I'm being kind about it, he embellished his story. And, you know, so I don't know. Was it a trance experience? Did he just rip it off from this novel? He was kind of a trickster in life, from what I'm told. You know, I never actually met him. I did have one phone call with him, like 2-hour phone call with him. It was pretty amazing, but I never met him in life. I did meet several times with his wife, Cora, and worked with her and shared ritual space with her. But yeah, so I don't know exactly where that came from. Later, he said that he was initiated into a coven in Oregon, and this would have been when he was about 15. And so he's got some different strains, I guess, of the craft, kind of working there. But poetically, mythically, he says that it came, from Africa. And that was his attempt, I think, to alleviate the possibility of racism, from our path, because he said, well, everybody comes from Africa. That's where the human race started. And so his idea was that fairy tradition, we might say that fairy tradition is a modern expression of the original form of human magic. Yeah. And when I say the original form, I'm not talking about outer forms. I'm not talking about rituals. I'm not talking about names. I'm just talking about an emotional approach, to magic. That it's primal, that it's based in the body, and it's based in the land. And those are things that I think really come up in almost all forms of witchcraft. There is kind of a carnal element. We focus on the sensual. We exalt the pleasures of the body. Probably as a little bit of a I don't know, backlash is the word that's coming to mind, but against, the ideas of monotheism in Christianity that often say that the body is bad and sex is bad. Yeah. So we've gone the other way, and it's like, well, no, these things are good, and we can find spirituality through them. And in that sense, it's a form of tantra, in the sense that you then transgress, the rules, that have been given to you. Right. Yeah. So there's power in what is considered taboo. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to transgress every single taboo. Some things are taboo for a really good reason, and you should never do them. Right. But some things are considered taboo culturally that's insane. I mean, homosexuality was considered, taboo. It's still considered taboo in some places. I mean, people are still being killed in some countries, for being gay. So especially if you're in one of those places, for you to actually embody your true self, that's a radical political act. And there's a lot of power there, and, so that's part of our path as well, is like claiming the power from transgressing these boundaries that have been thrust on you that, are really restrictive and not healthy. It's about claiming your true self, So that was kind of my motivation, I suppose, for writing Betwixt and Between. I also wanted to kind of create a snapshot of how the tradition was presented to me, and also to allow myself to have my creative process, because of course I rewrote all of the liturgy. I don't give any of the oral tradition, in that book, and yet it's all 100% fairy. So I recreated it. I didn't want to just steal other people's work. I mean, just because I might not know who wrote an invocation doesn't mean it's fair game, So I give that stuff when I'm teaching. I teach the oral tradition in addition to my own creative, stuff. But that's also part of our tradition, is tapping into that creative flow, and when we tap into that and we are expressing that creative energy, that's when we are closest to our higher spirit. And that also kind of reminds me of the ancient Irish idea, that poetic mastery and spiritual mastery are synonymous. Yeah. This idea that like, well, there is no difference between artistic creativity and spiritual creativity. It's all creativity, it's all spiritual, and I think that helps us because we have this idea that somehow these things are separate. Spirit and matter are at war with each other. No, they're part of the same spectrum. We can get to spirit through the body. Sex in particular is not something that distracts you necessarily, from your spiritual attainment. It could be the very vehicle for it. Now, anything can actually distract you. You could get addicted to anything, whatever. But we shouldn't just assume that like, oh, well, sex is bad, the body's bad. We've had enough of that with Orthodox Christianity telling us the earth is the devil's playground. Like, you know what? And this is why it's okay to treat the earth as a commodity. Yeah. Mm-hmm. This is why we have human-induced climate change, because we're over mining and we're overfishing and we're putting toxins in the air to make profit, because we don't treat the earth as sacred.
Yeah.
But how different would it be if that was just part of our spirituality, that like the physical world is the sacred world? If we actually treated the earth as heaven on earth, how different would that be?
Yeah.
And even in esoteric Christianity, that's part of the teaching too. Heaven is a place on earth. That wasn't just Belinda Carlisle.
I literally sang that in my head.
Yeah, me too. As soon as that comes out, it just automatically sings in my head instantly.
Those are the things we need to hold on to.
Yeah.
We have to embody that. We have to make choices, based on that. So I know I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent.
No, you're
No,
fine.
we love
Tangents.
I'm the king of tangents. So, but yeah. So Betwixt and Between gives basically the framework for if you wanted to work in a fairy style witchcraft, and specifically a blue rose fairy style witchcraft, then Betwixt and Between would allow you to do that. I'm not telling people, oh, you have to do it this way. I'm hoping that it just inspires people to create their own, because I don't want you to do what I'm doing, like specifically, I don't want you to recreate what I'm doing. I want you to be inspired by what I'm doing and then use that inspiration to create your own.
Yeah.
And to me, that's quintessentially fairy. If you can create your own path and it's meaningful for you, that's what it's all about. It's not about joining the cool club, or any of that stuff. I know one of the people that reviewed it on Amazon, God bless them. They were very upset because they thought, oh, I'm just trying to get people to join Blue Rose, and saying, oh, you can't do this unless you're initiated. Well, yeah, the book is not going to initiate you into the fairy tradition, but do you really need to be initiated into the fairy tradition? Very few people do. And very few people would get through it. The training is pretty arduous and it's usually pretty long. I trained for 5.5, close to 6 years before I got initiated. And I've had students, I had one student that trained with me for 12 years before they got initiated, because it's very personal. But ultimately, it's not about your initiatory status. That's human stuff. The spirits will claim who they want to claim, and you will have your experiences as you need to have your experiences. And hopefully my book will help people to open those
navigate
doors.
it. Navigate
exactly.
those waters a little bit.
But it is the other side of things. It's like the initiation, literally etymologically speaking, to initiate means to start. So people view the initiation as the end result, but no, that's the start. So but you need all that basis to then go, okay, now I'm starting this journey, because it's not like, oh, I'm done now.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And I know so many people have treated it that way. And it's especially problematic in fairy. I can't really speak to other forms of the craft. Not so much, because fairy's like the big thing. I've been initiated into a few different things, but fairy is really my home.
Yeah.
And but one of the things that I found to be different about fairy is that initiation really is about passing a current of power. Now, I'm not saying that other ones aren't, but that just wasn't my experience, because it didn't speak to me on the same level. For example, the Gardnerian tradition does not speak to me, but I'm not here to say that, oh, it doesn't have any power, right? I have friends of mine who are Gardnerian, and they touch that power, and for them, that is what empowers them. And that's because we're all different. Our souls are all different, and we all need different medicine, right? It's a very personal thing. But for me, fairy, it's not very rigid, in fact, it's usually very kind of bare bones to some degree. When you get down to it, it can be very Spartan. And it's really about ecstasy, falling into these ecstatic states. Excuse me. So Betwixt and Between was about kind of allowing people to have a taste of that.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna cough again, so I'm gonna
But that's kind of, I think, really what you were coming with that, as well as such a broad thing, is that it's such a personal experience, and it's such a where you say you want to inspire others to be able to create the path that suits them. And I think often we can get really caught up in like, we have to do it this way, or I need to follow this particular thing. And that's really, I think, an essence that can be missing sometimes, is that it is such a personal thing, and we have to find that part that speaks to us. Like you said, the Gardnerian didn't necessarily speak to you, but the fairy did, and people need to be able to explore and experience these other things to be able to see what it is that creates that spark within them.
Absolutely. And it might not be the same thing forever.
Yeah, that's right.
You might find an inspiration in something for a while, a few years maybe, and then maybe it doesn't speak to you later, and you find something else. And I'm always like excited to learn new stuff. And to me, though, fairy is so permeable, it's so nebulous. That no matter what I'm doing, it becomes fairy. My little joke is that fairy is like a virus, and it infects like everything, and so everything you do is fairy now. You know, and that's pretty much what I have found to be true. But I'm not going to project that onto other people and assume that that's going to be their experience as well. So pretty much Betwixt and Between kind of gave that foundation, you know, for if you wanted to learn about the history and all of that. Another reason I did it is because some of the more fundamentalist people in our tradition, I felt were really giving a version of revisionist history, you know, giving this idea that like, oh, this was always secret all the time. We did ask, before she died, we asked Cora Anderson, well, what is secret then in fairy? You know, because she said there were very few secrets. And I obviously can't tell you what that is, but it's very little. It's very little. And in fact, there's a lot of diversity in terms of different lineages, you know, in our tradition. But the material that we all share is so small. It can fit on a little like 3x5 index card. And probably on just one side. It's very small. It's very small. But that doesn't give you anything in terms of training you to be able to touch these powers, right? This is just the core. Victor didn't really do much in terms of telling people how to do certain things. For example, I'm going to give this is my best example. I asked my friend Anar. Anar is the current grandmaster of the fairy tradition. And I asked her, well, in terms of like astral projection, how did Victor teach like how to astral project? And she kind of chuckled. And she said, Victor told her that if you're going to bed at night and you want to astrally project, you put your slippers on the floor facing out. If you don't want to astrally project, you turn them facing in.
Interesting.
That was it.
That's it.
And I'm like, okay, that doesn't tell me anything, right? Like I
what's the step?
How do I do this? Well, he just did it. He was a natural. And so that was just a trigger for him. So he gave his personal trigger. But without the context, but without the context, it doesn't give you anything. It's like, okay, whatever. It's just weird slipper magic. You know, I don't know what that's going to even do. Right. Other people then were like, okay, we're going to create these systems, you know, and how to do this. You know, we're going to, you know, work with this energy. There's a particular exercise called the Iron Pentacle. And most people know that through the reclaiming tradition. Reclaiming is actually, in some ways, you could see that as an offshoot of the fairy tradition. I was going to say,
is it's kind of,
Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly, there is a legitimate initiatory lineage of fairy that is available, you know, in reclaiming. But reclaiming itself doesn't have to be fairy, but it has it has fairy DNA. And the Iron Pentacle is this, you know, this meditative tool, you know, so it's got these 5 points: sex, pride, self, power, passion. It kind of reads as an incomplete list of the 7 deadly sins, right? It's these things that were kind of problematic, right? But it's kind of a psychic diagnostic tool. Victor would say, go meditate on it. And that was pretty much it. Other people said, okay, we're going to actually energetically contemplate them. We're going to draw it in the body and do this whole thing. And now that's kind of a standard practice. And when I mentioned to people like, well, Victor didn't do it that way, they're shocked. You're like, what?
Well,
No,
how
this
did it
thing that
feel?
we have just accepted is like, oh, this is traditional. Well, it's traditional now because we're a living tradition.
Yeah.
You
that's
know,
it.
it's
Things
not
evolve
just
and
what's in a
change.
book, you know.
Yeah.
Betwixt and Between, it's a book. So it can't adapt. It can't tell you, you know, if there's exercises in there that aren't working for you, well, I don't know what to tell you. You know, that's not going to work for you. But if you are working with me, I would say, okay, well, then we're going to try something different because obviously this isn't working for you. So we have to adapt. We have to change and do that. So that's why a book could never replace a teacher.
Yeah.
You know, a living teacher. But at the same time, books are really helpful. You know, I don't want to throw them out. Obviously, I write books, so I'm not going to talk down.
No, we don't.
I mean, plus they look pretty on a shelf.
I know,
too.
I love it. I love books.
They did such a great job on those covers. So then the flip side, now I want to talk a little bit about Forbidden Mysteries of Faery Witchcraft. So that's definitely part 2.
Yeah.
Who's got the cover? I love that
It's
cover.
beautiful.
Too.
I love that color cover too.
I love everything about this. Speaks to me on so many levels.
Yeah.
Aren't these flowers? Aren't they the flowers that you have at funerals? Because are they lilies? No.
I don't know. They look a little datura to me, but
okay, I could be wrong.
Yeah,
I didn't do the cover. I didn't do the covers.
But yeah,
so,
I love those flowers that they have at funerals. Like, is it lilies? I think
it's usually lilies.
Usually lilies.
That's like one of my favorite flowers.
Yeah, me
and
too.
like, but you would never buy them for me because like people are like, oh, but that's death flowers. I'm like, I just love them. I love everything about this cover because I'm for those that have been listening for a little while, like I'm going through this whole journey of like Canunos and the Horned God and everything else. Like this is like my thing at the moment, and so everything about this just like ticks all the boxes, and it's got all the little Celtic knotwork on the skull and everything, and it's just anyway. I'll shush.
Yeah, I was so happy. Oh yeah, hold on. Now you say something, so your screen comes up.
Oh no, it's okay because I'll put it on gallery view everywhere anyway, so people will be able to see it.
Yeah, we'll be able to see
on the tube. They'll be able to see it everywhere.
Thank you. I feel very blessed. They did such a good job on the covers, and I know the saying is don't judge a book by its cover, but everybody does.
Yeah,
and
do.
And that's the first thing that people are drawn to.
It is.
You know, and
it's just a fact. It really is.
It is.
Like that. There have been some books on my shelf where I've bought them because back when I was a witchling, they were like the books that everyone says you should read this book and this book and this book and this book and this book. And so some of the books that I have on my shelf, and I don't know if people are going to come for me for this, but I almost wanted to throw them out and rebuy them when the cover got re-released because I hate the original cover. And I'm sure you can think exactly which books I'm referring to.
Yeah, don't name names.
No, I won't. I won't name names, but
yes.
But the original covers, they're just so... I just don't like them. And then when they were re-released, only like a few years later where they re-released, I'm like, oh, why didn't I just wait? Because these covers are annoying. Like, and so I have them on my bookshelf, but I have them right at the end because I just don't like the covers.
Well, those would be the ones to give away then, right? So it's like, you're just starting out. Here you go. I just got my new cover, whatever. Here you go. You don't have to tell them that, but here you go. Here's that book out of the goodness of my heart. Now it's off my shelf.
Right.
Yeah. But no, I totally get you because it gives you a vibe.
It
right?
does.
And if anything that we know about the craft is, vibe is important. The setting is important, right?
Yeah.
That's why in some traditions you dress in robes or skyclad, or you have ritual jewelry, or you turn off the lights and you light pretty candles and whatever, because that part of your deep soul, what in fairy we often call the fetch, your primal soul, it loves all those things, and it sets the mood, and the mood sets the stage for the magic.
Yeah.
If you were in that mindset and in that particular mood, it's going to change how the magic is flowing through you. So I totally get that. With some of the covers that I've seen, they're just embarrassing. I'm just like, oh, this does not put me in the right mood.
Especially when they just make it look so sugar pop kind of whatever.
There was some I was like, this looks like it was like it should be accompanied with the phrase "Dear Penthouse." This never happened to me before. It's like the sultry, cartoon woman on the cover, you know, whatever. I'm like, oh, really? This is kind of embarrassing. But
I feel like you and I are referring to the same book.
We probably are. But I also know people that absolutely love that cover too, you know, so it's different strokes for different folks. Right.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
And so diversity is important. You know, we shouldn't have just one view. It's not my way or the highway. You know, it's all of our ways. You know, we all have to find our own way, you know. So, but getting back to Forbidden Mysteries of Faery Witchcraft. So the title specifically comes from a particular phrase that is attached to, I would say, the most popular dark goddess in the fairy teaching pantheon, who is Anna. And she's often called the keeper of the Forbidden Mysteries. And Forbidden Mysteries simply refers to witchcraft itself. You know, it's the forbidden mysteries of nature, forbidden in the sense that the larger culture has forbidden it, but witches seek it out anyway. And that's the first mark of courage, you know, for the witch, is that, okay, the world is telling you you're evil, you're going to go to hell if you do this stuff, and yet you're doing it anyway because you're following your soul. And so that's really the forbidden mystery. The forbidden mystery is having the courage to follow your own convictions.
I love that. Yeah.
And so that's really what that's about. It's also, I would say, it's the selling point as well. You know, I'm no dummy, you know, like, ooh, super secrets, right? It kind of reminds me of, and I don't know if I used this I think I used this as one of my, quotes to start off a chapter, but I used to watch this animated show, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. You have to check it out. It's so cute.
I was gonna say, I'll have to watch it.
It's like, you know, they have all these little imaginary friends, and then children need an imaginary friend, so they go and they pick out their imaginary friend. But there's this one his name is Blue, and I'm gonna get the quote wrong, but he's just like, oh, unfathomable secrets are my favorite. And I thought that's just such human nature, right? It's just like, oh, it's secret. Oh, there's a red velvet rope. Oh, I have to be there, right? Oh, that's the club that I want to go to because they don't want me in. Therefore, I want to go. Right?
I want to be there. Yep.
Exactly. If you're telling me no, I got to do it, right? So that's kind of part of that too. It's about that transgressing those societal boundaries, right? And so, I think that's really important for the craft in general, but specifically in fairy tradition, that's such a big part of our stuff. But that book really then, it's kind of based on the curriculum in Blue Rose, what is like the next level. You know, I have the practitioner level, that's kind of almost the entry level, you know, for fairy tradition. And then you can get a dedication, you know, so you've been working with this, you've completed that, you know, level. I feel like you're ready, you know, for this next work. And so Forbidden Mysteries is based on the dedicant level, which is really more about, again, we'll circle back around to the idea of shadow work. You know? So this is the underworld, the shadow. I also talk about the concept of divine possession, you know, and that is such a big thing in fairy tradition, you know, possession kind of in a similar way to what you might expect in voodoo or certain other African traditional religions. It's not the same, but similar. I've had some pretty powerful experiences with that, and I have my own opinions on, I'm sure you're shocked, but you know, on how that can be correctly done or safely done. And I know I'm at variance with some other people in my own tradition, you know, about that. And then I also talk about cursing, you know, because I do think that's an important part of, you know, working with the witch. But I also talk about the folkloric fairy element. And that's not something that everyone in Anderson Fairy works with. And so, which I was a little shocked when I came into the tradition. I was like, what do you mean you're not working with the fairy realm, you know, whatever. Although we did in our line, as I was trained, we did actually work with the fairy realm. Some of that was actually inspired by the work of R.J. Stewart. And if you're not familiar with his work, your listeners, I would really recommend that you check that out. He's written some really great stuff. He draws from the old folkloric stories, and then he moves that into a practical spiritual path. And he's just amazing. And I did have the opportunity to actually meet and work with him a couple of years ago. And he was just delightful. He's a fount of wisdom and information, and just a great person to be around.
Yeah.
And he gave me such an amazing endorsement for Forbidden Mysteries. It made me cry. It was just because he's like, in my mind, he's the man when it comes to, if you want to study like folkloric fairy spirituality, he's the one to read. He's the guy. And he just gave me such a glowing endorsement, you know, of Forbidden Mysteries. I was humbled and amazed and all of that, all the things. So, but definitely, I mean, you could just start with Forbidden Mysteries if you had to. I do have an appendix in the back that gives you some of the foundational exercises. If you really just wanted to start with that one, you could, but I really think you'd be cheating yourself if you didn't start.
It's more of a progression kind of thing.
It really is a progression. I really do see it as part two. It's the sequel to Betwixt and Between. But, you know, the publisher, Llewellyn really was like, well, we want people to be able to just pick it up on its own and not have to read this other thing. And I get that, you know. So again, it has that appendix there, but you really should.
Best experience, best experience 1 and 2.
and you know, rightly so, because I mean, they're very, very different books, but written in a very similar manner. Both being very structured, having your geek out, lots of text with like lots of theory, and you've got like interactive exercise. Like I love a book that I can pick up and treat it like a manual that says this is how you now apply. Like here's the knowledge, now apply it. Like not just talking a whole lot of shit, and I'm just like, okay, so now what?
Be able to actually action it, be able to actually do. Yeah.
I don't know how, honestly, I'm not sure that I would really be able to effectively write a book that didn't have like the practical stuff, because that's primarily what I do. I think the philosophical stuff is an outgrowth of the practice, you know? And so if I only wrote something that was just the philosophy, it would be a much shorter book. You know? And I continued that with my next book that's coming out is The Witch's Name. And so, but that one it's not just a book on magical names. You know, I've seen books out there like, oh, here's a dictionary of magical names. And that could be helpful. You know, I'm not getting down on that. But my approach to it is that, well, the magical name is really a spell that you're casting on yourself. And you're reinforcing that spell every time you use it, especially with other people. And it's all about incorporating different symbolic elements into creating your magical persona, you know? And so, I mean, I am Storm Faerywolf. That's what I go by in real life. You know, all my mail at my house comes to Storm Faerywolf, you know, because that's the name that I use. Because I'm a public warlock. That was something that I knew from the early age that I wanted to do. I was inspired by the likes of Laurie Cabot, you know, who the official witch of Salem. You know, when I was a little boy, she was running for mayor of Salem, and I saw her on the news and in her black flowy robes and everything. And I was so inspired by that, you know, and I think visibility is so important. Also, as a gay man, I recognize how visibility is important. We don't get rights by being invisible.
No,
you know, we continue to be bashed if we're invisible, if we don't stand up, you know, and this isn't to say everybody has to be visible. You know, those of us who are called to be visible, who feel that we're in a safe place. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. Not that that's perfect. You know, I've certainly had my instances here, you know, of bigotry and harassment and even violence, but it's not the same as if I was in like Alabama, or, you know, whatever, someplace that, you know,
exactly.
You got to be really careful and you know, not be visible at all. But I'm in a position where I can. And in fact, circling back to something I'd said about Cora before, we asked her about secrecy. And when she said that, oh, only a couple things are secret. So then we asked her, well, then why are people in our tradition treating everything like a secret? And she said, well, it really was because in the 1950s, if you told people you were a witch, people would throw rocks through your windows and you get your kids taken away. You know, so it was practical. So the secrecy wasn't so much a magical concern. There is a little bit of that, but it was really practical. It was keeping yourself safe. There are some magical concerns. Certain things are secret. There's initiatory secrets, but that's different. And but yeah, so visibility, I think is for those of us who are able to be visible, I think it's really important that we do, because that is a political statement. I think the most political thing we can ever do is simply be who we are unabashedly. And change won't come otherwise,
No, that's
and we need that to come. And we're in a better place now. I mean, like, here you are in Australia, right? And you're able to have a podcast. Rosalie Norton didn't have that same
no, that's right.
courtesy, right? She was targeted. She had a really hard life, for being a witch, and jail and the whole thing, right? So which, I mean, like, if people don't know who she is, they need. If people don't know who she is, you need to check out Rosalie Norton. She is one of my favorite. She's also a fabulous artist. One of my big inspirations. I can't remember the name of it though. There was just a documentary.
I was just trying to think of it. There's a movie that's just come out. I think it's,
and it was superb. It was amazing. God, I can't remember what its name.
No, it's something about the cross,
King's Cross,
Witch of
King's
Cross.
Yeah.
So good. It was much better than I thought it was going to be. It was well produced.
It
was just fun. Even like my partner Devin was like, "Oh, I'll watch like 5 minutes," but he had like some other stuff to do. He was just glued. He didn't leave the room the entire time. We all four of us were just like watching that show. It was great. So yeah, that was a great thing. But yeah, because she was like kind of one of the first, really, in Australia. She was like the first visible witch. And so she really bore the backlash, from that. But because she did that, it's easier now for other people. It's this progression.
Yeah,
exactly.
Definitely.
She's our ancestors. There's that saying that if we stand tall, it's because we're standing on the shoulders of our ancestors. And that's a real concrete example, of how that works.
And then I mean, we've had like the likes of like Fiona Horn's been on our show a couple of times now, and like because of the work that she did in the 90s, that's obviously that's another generation through. And then now, obviously, I mean, I'm not putting my claim to fame on this, but like now we're going like one step further, which is like she was very much on the television, whereas we're taking it to the internet now. So it's like each generation we've got new waves of witches coming out of the closet and like presenting their own view. Like I'm not
absolutely
any subject.
No, but you are, and you should recognize that like the work that you're doing is important. The work that you're doing, just on your podcast, that is important because you're part of that legacy. And more than that, you're also creating a space for other witches. Like you're giving me an opportunity to come in and talk about, the stuff that I'm doing. So it's like this exponential, visibility, that's happening. So no, you should give yourself some credit.
And it's also because
really
we live on
important work.
It's also because we live so far removed from the rest of the world. We're literally in the middle of several oceans. So it's like there's no land connecting us to anyone. So like we've always had this struggle here that anything we want to get has to be imported. And it's usually at a massive cost. Even the books like that we have available, like so many books that we try to pre-order, you can't. Like even with Amazon, there are so many books we still can't get that I have to now go on my little witchy hunt to try to find them in like these little remote bookstores and say, hey, do you ship to Australia? They're like, oh, I'm sorry, we don't. Oh, damn it. Lucky for me, I have friends in LA, so I ship to them and then they ship to me. Like,
nice.
There are ways that you can get around these things, but it's so frustrating. So that's why we thought, you know what, it's not, and it doesn't just come with physical things. Like we want to give voices to people that perhaps some of the younger generation witches won't know about. Because, it's something that we've grown up knowing certain names. And then as we've grown, we've come across new people and all that kind of stuff. And so we've kind of gone at both ends of the spectrum. We tried to go with, people that have been around for a long time. And then we've gone for people that are up and coming and everything in between. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. That's so important because, again, diversity.
That's right.
We can't just, have that homogenistic, patch. Did I just make up a word?
I understand you. I like
these new words that you're making loud, right? Poetic license. So there you go. But I think it's so important that we hold that space for multiplicity. For diverging from the norm, so I love to hear that like, oh yeah, tried and true, that's important. We got to keep the tried and true, stuff too, because, and even tried and true people, they're learning stuff all the time. I've been doing this for a while, since I was 14, right? I'm 50 now. And, but I am a much different warlock than I was at 14. I'm certainly not doing the same stuff,
Yeah.
And even now that I've written these books, it's kind of inspired me in other ways and whatever. And then, so I hope that I'll continue to learn and grow and be divergent, in my own ways. I think we should all be so lucky as to be able to do that. So thank you for giving a space.
No, of course, you're very welcome.
Voices.
And so for anyone listening, obviously, like, you follow Storm on all forms of social media, like, just do all the things, buy his books, follow him on social media, do all the things. So when can we expect Magical Names to come out?
So, okay. So the witch's name,
witch's name, sorry, my mistake.
No, it's all good. I mean, if you Google that, or, I'm sure it'll still come up on Amazon because they're really good about it. That comes out, I think it's March 8th of 2022. And then a couple months later, my next book comes out, The Satyr's Kiss. That's the working title. So I'm not exactly sure what it'll be. So we'll see. I'm really hoping that's what it's going to be.
I was going to say, I really like that one. It's good.
I do too. I'm so excited. And my editor likes it too. And so I feel pretty good about it, but we'll see what the team says, because there's a whole team decision.
I was going to say, we might even have to invite you back to do a bit of a pre-launch discussion about that when it's about to launch and drop. So then
I would love to. I will say that's actually the first book that I wanted to write. And so it took me this long to get there. And I was a little apprehensive at first because it draws heavily on sex magic, and it's specifically sex magic for queer men. And so I know some people are gonna be like, oh, it's not inclusive, because I don't really talk about women, and and I'm like, that's because I'm not a woman, I'm also not a trans man. And so I can't speak to that. I'm trying to be inclusive of trans people, of bisexual people, all of that. But specifically it is for men. Although it's interesting to me that so many women have told me they're excited about that book. And so I'm delighted. I'm hoping that everybody is able to get something out of it. But I felt like our particular, like gay men, queer men have been really underserved when it comes to paganism and the craft. And there's a few things out there, but nothing quite like this. This definitely goes in its own direction. It's very much heavily into sex magic. I have a big chapter on the philosophies of queer sex magic, and then practical. I give a lot of exercises in sex magic for solo work. It all starts with solo work. If you're a sex magician, most of the sex magic you're going to do is solo, and that's how it works. But I also have exercises for couples and exercises for groups, because of course I'm in an open polyamorous relationship. There's 4 of us, and we're all witches, and we all do magic and stuff. But not everything that we do is sexual. Most of the magic that I do isn't sexual, but I wanted there to be a space for that showed people that this is okay. And this is actually spiritual too. This isn't just, being kinky. No, not that there's anything wrong with being kinky, but there is a spiritual element to this. You can even have group sex magic and have it be a spiritual endeavor. And so I talk about like redefining the great rite, and that was something that years ago, I got the hate mail for that, because I talked about a gay great rite. And people were like, you can't do that because it's not, gay people can't do the great rite because it's all about the man and the woman. I'm like, yeah, that's what it is for you. Yeah. That's not what it is for me. And this is what I'm talking about, So for me, it's about opening that door for other queer men to embrace their sexuality and to recognize that their sexuality is not a detriment from their magical path. It is an asset. Yeah. And here's what we can do with it. So there's a lot of exercises in there in all different forms. I've got a lot of different rituals, that are sexually charged, but I also give versions that are non-sexual as well. Because you're not going to always want to do sex magic, and that shouldn't be what queer magic is all about. It shouldn't all be about sexual activity.
You can't just
but
go
I
from
wanted
one
to claim
extreme
that.
to the other kind of thing. You got to find
exactly.
somewhere in between.
I wanted there just to be options, for people. So,
my mate gay brain has gone, I wonder when the graphic novel version comes out.
I was already told, like, oh, are you gonna have an OnlyFans that goes along with it? Probably not, because I'm not a gym rat. So there you go. I'm usually sitting at my computer writing, so I probably should be on the treadmill, but whatever.
Well, you're in San Francisco.
No one's paying me for being on the treadmill.
That's right.
It's common practice in like Silicon Valley to have those like treadmills that go underneath your desk that you walk on while you're typing.
Oh my god!
Devin has one.
Yeah,
really?
Devin has one. Yeah, and the only reason I don't.
It's
a real thing.
Oh
so
you can walk on the treadmill while typing.
Yeah. He has one of those. He has a desk that like automatically elevates up, and then he has a treadmill under it, so he can actually be on the treadmill while he's typing. I'm like, that's brilliant. That wouldn't work for my room. My room is all. It has to first and foremost be a temple.
Yeah.
And so even my desk.
It looks amazing, by the way. I've been admiring it the whole time.
Thank you. I love it in here. But my desk is it's a Murphy desk. So I can like just close it up and then there's no evidence that it's an office. Yeah. One of my patron deities told me that you can claim this as an office, but it has to first and foremost be a temple.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I have to be able to close it up and see no clutter. I don't even have books in here. I don't have anything printed. There's no posters. It's just spiritual art and crystals and plants, and I can do in my altar, and that allows me to kind of be in that space, mentally as well as physically. So
I love it. Awesome. So I guess then that's a natural closing then for this interview, but it has been absolutely fantastic having you on the show. Thank you so much for all of your many tangents and all of your many mic drop moments.
Really great.
It's actually good because this is like it's necessary conversation that we all needed to have. Plus we also got in that we eventually got round to talking about your books and your works, but I think it was like so poignant the way that it happened. So no, we really appreciate you coming on the show, and I can't wait to bring you back again.
Thank you. I would love to. Thank you so much. This has been a blast. You guys are awesome, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about my work, because otherwise it would just be me talking to myself.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that either. I talk to myself all the time.
That's fine.
I think the only concern I ever have is when I hear a response from something I've said to myself. I'm like,
where did that
come from? But anyway, so everyone check him out on social media. Check him out. Well, look at me go. Check him out on social media, as well as faerywolf.com. You can order his books from all major retailers. I'm sure there's even places. I think I picked these up from local bookstores in Melbourne. So you don't even have to go to the big conglomerates. If you don't want to, go to your locals. They'll probably have them, or if not, they can probably get them in. But no, it's been absolutely fantastic. And if there's anything you want us to ask Storm the next time he's on the show, let us know in the comments, whether it be here or here. Let us know, and we'd love to invite him back to talk about that stuff. So next minute we're going to have all these people writing, ooh, I want to know about this sexual position and what that's good for.
Oh god.
Keep it clean, witches. Anyways, but no, so to all of our viewers and listeners, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
See